In the crisp autumn of 2023, Daniel Harper steered his yellow school bus through the quiet streets of Cedarville, Ohio, a small town nestled among rolling hills and fading farmland. At 58, he carried the weight of a life shaped by routine and resilience. For over 2 decades, he had worked as a machine operator at the local auto parts factory, his days filled with the hum of machinery and the camaraderie of coworkers. When the plant shuttered 3 years prior, leaving Cedarville's economy bruised, Daniel found himself at a crossroads. Retirement felt premature, and the emptiness of idle days unsettled him. He took a job with the Cedarville School District, driving Bus 17, a role that offered structure and a quiet sense of purpose. Each morning and afternoon, he ferried students to and from Cedarville Middle School, their voices a lively contrast to the stillness of his evenings alone in his modest one-story home. The bus rumbled along Maple Avenue, its worn suspension creaking as it passed rows of brick houses and neatly trimmed lawns. October sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns across the cracked vinyl seats. The air carried the faint scent of diesel and the sugary remnants of snacks left behind by the students. Most of the children filled the bus with energy, their conversations a chaotic blend of laughter, complaints about homework, and debates over the latest video games. Some tossed crumpled paper balls or leaned across aisles to swap stories, their voices rising and falling like a restless tide. Daniel, his hands steady on the wheel, kept an eye on them through the wide rearview mirror, his presence calm but authoritative, a silent reminder to keep the chaos in check. Among the 30-odd students, one figure stood out for her stillness. 14-year-old Emily Carter occupied the fourth row, always on the left side, her slight frame pressed close to the window. Her chestnut hair fell in loose waves, often shielding her face as she stared out at the passing scenery. Unlike her peers, who jostled for attention or scrolled through phones, Emily remained detached, her backpack clutched tightly on her lap as if it were a lifeline. Daniel had noticed her from the first week of the school year, her silence a stark contrast to the boisterous energy around her. Her shoulders slumped forward, and her hands fidgeted with the straps of her bag, betraying a nervous energy. On some afternoons, when the bus was quieter, he caught the glint of tears in her eyes, quickly wiped away as if she feared being seen. Daniel's initial impression was that Emily was simply adjusting to the rhythms of middle school. Adolescence, he knew from raising his own daughter, now grown and living in Columbus, was a turbulent time, marked by insecurities and shifting friendships. Cedarville Middle School, with its low brick building and sprawling athletic fields, could feel overwhelming to a newcomer. He had learned from the school roster that Emily had moved to town just before the semester began, her family settling into a rental house on the edge of Cedarville. The transition, he reasoned, might explain her withdrawn demeanor. Yet, as the weeks passed, her isolation persisted, unshaken by the fleeting alliances of her classmates. She never joined the chatter, never laughed at the jokes that echoed through the bus, and never raised her head to meet anyone's gaze. His observations grew sharper with each trip. Emily's clothing, though clean, seemed slightly oversized, as if borrowed or chosen for comfort rather than style, a faded hoodie, loose jeans, and scuffed sneakers. Her face, pale and delicate, bore faint shadows under her eyes, suggesting sleepless nights or something deeper. Daniel, who prided himself on knowing his students' quirks, the loud ones, the dreamers, the troublemakers, found Emily's quietness unsettling. It wasn't the shy reserve of a bookish child or the sulky defiance of a rebellious teen. There was a weight to her silence, a fragility that tugged at his instincts. He recalled his own daughter at that age, how her mood swung but never settled into such persistent sorrow. Something about Emily felt off, though he couldn't pinpoint what. The route took the bus past the town's landmarks, the old grain elevator, now a relic of Cedarville's agricultural past, the diner where locals gathered for coffee and gossip, and the park where kids played soccer until dusk. Daniel's hands moved automatically, turning the wheel with the ease of habit, but his mind lingered on Emily. He noted how she always boarded the bus last, her steps slow and deliberate, as if delaying the moment she had to join the others. When she exited at her stop on Elm Street, she walked toward her house with the same hesitancy, her head bowed as if bracing for something. Her stepfather, a tall man with a stern face, often waited at the curb, his presence seeming to shrink her further. Daniel had seen him only a few times, but the man's sharp gestures and clipped demeanor left an impression. As the bus emptied on that particular afternoon, Daniel glanced at Emily in the rearview mirror. She sat alone, the last student on board, her face half hidden by her hair. The sunlight caught the edge of her cheek, revealing a faint redness around her eyes. She didn't move to gather her things until the bus slowed at her stop, her movement sluggish, almost reluctant. When she stepped off, she didn't look back, her figure disappearing down the cracked sidewalk toward the small, beige house with peeling shutters. Daniel watched her go, a knot forming in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that her silence was more than shyness, more than the growing pains of youth. It was as if she carried a burden too heavy for her slight frame, one that no one else had noticed or chosen to see. As the days following that October afternoon unfolded, Daniel Harper's unease about Emily Carter intensified, settling into a quiet but persistent weight in his chest. The routine of driving bus 17 through Cedarville's familiar streets continued unchanged, yet his focus sharpened on the girl in the fourth row. Over the next 2 weeks, Emily's behavior grew more pronounced in its isolation, her presence on the bus a stark contrast to the lively chaos of her peers. She sat in her usual spot, always on the left, her body curled slightly toward the window as if seeking refuge in the glass. Her chestnut hair, often unbrushed, hung like a curtain over her face, shielding her from the world. The other students, caught up in their own dramas, shouting about weekend plans, teasing each other over crushes, or arguing about sports, seemed oblivious to her, their voices filling the bus with a clamor that only deepened her solitude. Daniel, from his perch at the wheel, watched her through the rearview mirror with growing concern. Emily's movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as if she were conserving energy for some unseen struggle. Her hands, small and pale, gripped her backpack with a tension that never eased, the straps twisted tightly around her fingers. On several occasions, he noticed her shoulders trembling faintly, a subtle sign of tears she tried to hide by turning her face further toward the window. The sight stirred memories of his daughter's teenage years, when fleeting heartbreaks or school pressures could cast a shadow over her days. But Emily's sadness felt different, heavier, as if rooted in something more profound than the usual turbulence of youth. It was the consistency of her distress that troubled him most, a pattern that refused to shift even as the weeks progressed. One afternoon, as the bus neared the halfway point of its route, Daniel caught a fleeting glimpse of Emily's hand slipping beneath her seat. The motion was quick, almost furtive, as if she were hiding something from prying eyes. The bus was nearly empty by then, with only a handful of students remaining, their chatter subdued as they gathered their belongings for their stops. Emily's action was so subtle that it might have gone unnoticed, but Daniel's heightened attention to her made it stand out. She leaned forward, her backpack momentarily obscuring her hands, and when she straightened, her expression was one of guarded relief, as if she had accomplished a small but significant task. The moment passed quickly, and she resumed her usual posture, staring out the window. But the incident lodged itself in Daniel's mind, a puzzle piece that didn't yet fit. He began to pay closer attention to her routines. Each morning, Emily boarded the bus last, her steps slow and hesitant, as if she dreaded the journey. She avoided eye contact not only with her classmates but with Daniel as well, her gaze fixed on the floor or the horizon beyond the window. Her clothing, always the same rotation of oversized hoodies and worn jeans, seemed to swallow her slight frame, adding to her air of fragility. The shadows under her eyes grew darker, and her skin took on a pallor that suggested more than just fatigue. Daniel wondered if she was eating properly or sleeping enough, but he had no way to know without crossing a boundary. His role as a bus driver limited his interactions with students, yet his years of observing them had honed his instincts, and those instincts now whispered that something was deeply wrong. To better understand her situation, Daniel consulted the school roster during a break at the depot. The laminated sheet, clipped to his dashboard, listed Emily Carter as a new 8th grader, enrolled just a month earlier. Her emergency contact information included her mother, Sarah Carter, and a stepfather, Mark Reynolds, with an address on Elm Street, a quiet part of town known for its modest homes and older residents. The fact that Emily was a recent transplant to Cedarville offered a possible explanation for her withdrawal. New schools, new faces, and the loss of old friends could weigh heavily on a young girl. Yet, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that her isolation ran deeper than homesickness or social awkwardness. He recalled his own daughter's transition to a new school years ago, how she had been shy but eventually found her place. Emily, by contrast, seemed to retreat further with each passing day. The more Daniel observed, the more details he noticed that fueled his concern. On one chilly morning, as the bus idled at a stoplight, he saw Emily wince slightly, her hand pressing briefly against her stomach before she caught herself and resumed her rigid posture. The gesture was fleeting, but it struck him as odd, a sign of discomfort that didn't align with the usual ailments of a teenager. Another day, he noticed her flinch when a classmate's backpack brushed against her as they passed her seat, her reaction sharp and instinctive, as if she expected harm. These small moments accumulated, each one adding to the growing sense that Emily was carrying a burden far heavier than her peers could imagine. At her stop on Elm Street, Daniel began to linger a moment longer, watching as she stepped off the bus and walked toward her house. The beige ranch-style home, with its peeling shutters and overgrown lawn, looked unremarkable, yet there was something unsettling about the way Emily approached it. Her steps slowed as she neared the front door, her shoulders hunching as if bracing for an unseen storm. On several occasions, her stepfather, Mark, stood waiting at the curb, his tall frame imposing in a dark jacket. His face, angular and unsmiling, carried a hardness that made Daniel uneasy. Mark's interactions with Emily were brief, his hand often gripping her arm as he guided her toward the house, his pace brisk and unyielding. Emily never looked up at him, her gaze fixed on the ground, her body seeming to shrink under his presence. Daniel's concern began to take root, a quiet resolve forming in his mind. He couldn't intervene directly, not yet, but he could watch more closely, cataloging the details that didn't add up. He considered speaking to the school counselor or Emily's teachers, but he hesitated, unsure if his observations warranted such a step. His role was to drive, to ensure the students' safety on the road, not to pry into their lives. Yet, the image of Emily's tear-streaked face, her furtive movement under the seat, and the shadow of fear in her eyes refused to leave him. As he parked the bus at the depot each evening, the hum of the engine fading into silence, Daniel felt a growing determination to understand what was happening to the girl in the fourth row, sensing that her silence held a story that needed to be heard. On a crisp October evening in 2023, Daniel Harper completed his afternoon route, the yellow school bus emptying as the last students stepped off at their stop on Cedarville's quiet outskirts. The sun had dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, and a chill hung in the air, seeping through the open bus door. Daniel, alone now, began his routine inspection, a task he performed with the diligence of a man accustomed to order. He moved methodically down the aisle, collecting stray items left behind by the students, crinkled candy wrappers, a forgotten pencil, a crumpled math worksheet. The bus, still warm from the day's activity, carried the faint scent of vinyl and adolescent energy, though the silence that followed the children's departure felt heavier than usual. As he reached the fourth row, where Emily Carter always sat, Daniel paused. The memory of her furtive gesture from earlier in the week flickered in his mind, vivid and unsettling. He had seen her lean forward, her hand slipping beneath the seat in a quick, secretive motion, as if concealing something from view. At the time, the bus had been nearly empty, and the act had been so subtle that it might have gone unnoticed had he not been watching her closely. Now, standing in the quiet bus, he felt a pull to investigate, his instincts sharpened by weeks of observing her growing withdrawal. He crouched beside her seat, his knees creaking from years of labor, and peered into the shadowed space beneath the bench. The area around the seat appeared unremarkable at first glance. Dust motes clung to the floor, and a few crumbs from a forgotten snack dotted the surface. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed something out of place, a small plastic bag, no larger than a credit card, tucked tightly against the air vent's metal grill. His pulse quickened as he reached for it, his fingers brushing the cool steel of the vent before grasping the bag. It was lightweight, almost insubstantial, but its presence felt momentous. He straightened, holding the bag up to the fading light streaming through the bus windows, and examined its contents. Inside was a partially used blister pack of pills, the kind sealed in foil with small, white tablets visible through the clear plastic. The pack was unmarked, bearing no label or prescription details, which only deepened his unease. Daniel's heart sank as he turned the bag over in his hands, the plastic crinkling softly. He had no medical expertise, but he knew enough to recognize that such pills were not something a 14-year-old should possess, let alone hide. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen's glow casting a stark light on his weathered face, and began searching for information about the medication. His fingers, calloused from years at the factory, moved clumsily over the touchscreen as he typed in the few details he could discern from the blister pack's appearance. The search results loaded slowly, the depot's weak signal testing his patience, but when they appeared, his breath caught. The pills matched the description of a prescription painkiller, a potent opioid often used for severe pain management. The realization hit him like a cold wave. Emily was hiding something dangerous, something far beyond the scope of typical teenage rebellion. He sat heavily on the nearest seat, the vinyl creaking under his weight, and stared at the bag in his hand. Questions swirled in his mind, each more troubling than the last. Why would Emily have these pills? Were they hers, or was she holding them for someone else? The secrecy of her actions suggested she knew their significance, yet her fragile demeanor made it hard to imagine her involved in something as serious as drug misuse. He considered her pale face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she winced and pressed her hand to her stomach. Could the pills be linked to her physical discomfort, or was there a darker explanation? The thought of her being coerced or manipulated gnawed at him, though he had no evidence to support such a suspicion. Daniel's first instinct was to report the find immediately. The school district had clear protocols for such discoveries. Notify the principal. Turn over the item and let the authorities handle it. He could already envision handing the bag to Principal Watkins, a stern but fair woman who would likely involve the school counselor and, if necessary, the police. Yet, something held him back. Emily's vulnerability, her silent tears, and the fear in her eyes when she stepped off the bus each day made him hesitate. Reporting the pills without understanding her situation felt like a betrayal, as if he were abandoning her to a system that might not see the full picture. He knew the consequences could be severe: suspension, police involvement, or worse, but he also knew that jumping to conclusions could do more harm than good. He slipped the plastic bag into his jacket pocket, its weight slight but undeniable, and continued his inspection, though his mind remained fixed on Emily. The bus was spotless now, save for the lingering questions that clung to him like dust. As he locked the bus and walked to his pickup truck in the depot lot, the evening air bit at his knuckles, and the sky had darkened to a deep indigo. He climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar creak of the old truck grounding him, and sat for a moment, staring at the dashboard. The pills were a tangible clue, a fragment of Emily's hidden story, but they raised more questions than answers. He resolved to watch her more closely in the days ahead, to look for signs that might explain her actions without exposing her to immediate scrutiny. As he drove home through Cedarville's quiet streets, the plastic bag in his pocket felt like a silent plea, urging him to uncover the truth behind the girl in the fourth row. As the days following his discovery of the hidden pills unfolded, Daniel Harper's concern for Emily Carter solidified into a quiet, resolute determination. The weight of the small plastic bag, still tucked in his jacket pocket, pressed against him like an unspoken promise to uncover the truth. He continued driving Bus 17 through Cedarville's familiar streets, the routine unchanged, but his attention was now razor-sharp, fixed on the girl in the fourth row. Over the next few days, he observed Emily with a vigilance that felt both necessary and intrusive, noting every detail of her behavior with the precision of a man who knew the cost of overlooking signs. The October air grew colder, the leaves carpeting the sidewalks in shades of crimson and gold, yet the warmth of the season did nothing to ease the chill that settled in his chest whenever he saw her. Emily's appearance grew more concerning with each passing day. Her pallor had deepened, her skin taking on an almost translucent quality that made her seem fragile, as if she might shatter under the slightest pressure. The dark circles under her eyes, once faint, now stood out starkly against her pale face, suggesting nights spent sleepless or plagued by something more troubling. Her movements were slow, almost lethargic, as she boarded the bus each morning, her steps heavy with a reluctance that Daniel recognized as more than mere fatigue. She continued to sit in her usual spot, her body angled toward the window, her chestnut hair a barrier between her and the world. Her hands, perpetually clutching her backpack, trembled slightly, and Daniel noticed her fingers occasionally brushing against her stomach, a gesture that seemed involuntary, as if she were soothing an ache she couldn't name. At her stop on Elm Street, Daniel began to linger longer, his foot easing off the accelerator as he watched her descend the bus steps. Her stepfather, Mark Reynolds, was often there, waiting at the curb in his dark jacket, his angular face set in a mask of impatience. Mark's presence was imposing, his broad shoulders and sharp features casting a shadow over Emily as she approached him. His interactions with her were brief and commanding, his hand often gripping her arm with a firmness that made Daniel's jaw tighten. Emily never resisted, but her body language spoke volumes, her shoulders hunched, her gaze fixed on the ground, her steps quickening as if to escape his scrutiny. Mark's eyes, cold and unyielding, rarely softened, and Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was a source of Emily's distress. One afternoon, Daniel decided to test the waters. As Emily stepped off the bus, he called out to her, asking about her day in a tone he hoped was gentle and unthreatening. She froze momentarily, her eyes darting to the ground, and offered only a nervous nod before hurrying toward Mark, who stood waiting with his arms crossed. The exchange, brief as it was, confirmed Daniel's suspicions that Emily was avoiding connection, her fear palpable even in that fleeting moment. He watched as Mark steered her toward their beige ranch house, its peeling shutters and overgrown lawn giving it a neglected air. The sight of her shrinking under Mark's grip lingered in Daniel's mind long after he drove away, the bus's engine humming as he navigated back to the depot. Determined to understand more, Daniel sought out additional information. During a break at the school depot, he pulled out his phone and dialed the number for Emily's homeroom teacher, Miss Clara Bennett, a woman he had met briefly during a staff orientation. Clara's voice, when she answered, was warm but tinged with concern as Daniel explained his observations. She confirmed that Emily's behavior in class mirrored what he had seen on the bus. She was withdrawn, rarely participating, and had begun missing classes, often citing vague illnesses. Clara noted that Emily's grades, once solid, had started to slip, and she had stopped engaging with her peers, sitting alone during group activities. The teacher's confirmation deepened Daniel's unease, painting a clearer picture of a girl retreating from the world around her. His suspicions about Emily's home life grew stronger. The ranch house on Elm Street, unremarkable in its outward appearance, began to feel like a place of secrets. Daniel started lingering near her stop after his route, parking his pickup truck a block away and watching from a distance. The neighborhood was quiet, with older couples tending their gardens and children riding bikes in the fading light. But the Carter house stood out for its stillness. No lights glowed in the windows most evenings, and the front door remained closed, as if sealing off whatever happened inside. On one occasion, he saw Mark leave the house late at night, climbing into a dark sedan and driving off with a speed that suggested urgency. Emily's silhouette appeared briefly at an upstairs window, her figure small and ghostly, before the curtain fell back into place. Daniel's observations fueled a growing sense of responsibility. He knew he was treading a fine line, his role as a bus driver not extending to such personal investigations. Yet, the image of Emily's pale face, her trembling hands, and the pills hidden under her seat refused to let him rest. He considered the possibility that her distress stemmed from something at home. Perhaps Mark's stern demeanor was more than just strict parenting, or perhaps there were pressures within the family that Emily couldn't voice. The painkillers, potent and dangerous, suggested a level of desperation that chilled him. He wondered if she was using them to cope with physical or emotional pain. or if someone else was involved, a thought that made his stomach turn. Each evening, as he parked the bus and walked to his truck, Daniel felt the weight of the plastic bag in his pocket, a reminder of the choice he faced. He could turn it over to the school, let the system take over, and wash his hands of the matter. But the thought of Emily's fearful eyes, her body shrinking under Mark's grip, made him hesitate. He needed more context, more signs, before he could act without risking harm to her. As he drove home through Cedarville's darkening streets, the town's quiet charm felt like a facade, hiding whatever truth lay behind the girl in the fourth row. His resolve hardened. He would watch, he would wait, and he would find a way to help her, even if it meant stepping beyond the boundaries of his role. On a late October evening in 2023, as the sky darkened to a bruised purple over Cedarville, Ohio, Daniel Harper's instincts propelled him into action. The air was sharp with the bite of approaching winter, and the streets of the small town were nearly deserted as he completed his bus route. His mind, however, was far from the familiar rhythm of his work. The image of Emily Carter, pale and trembling, haunted him, as did the plastic bag of painkillers still hidden in his jacket pocket. As he dropped her off at her stop on Elm Street, he noticed her stepfather, Mark Reynolds, waiting as usual, his tall frame looming under the dim streetlight. Mark's grip on Emily's arm was tighter than usual, his movements brisk as he led her to a dark sedan parked across the street. Something in the urgency of their departure, the way Emily's shoulders hunched as she followed, ignited a spark of alarm in Daniel. Unable to dismiss the unease that had been building for weeks, he made a split-second decision to follow them. He climbed into his old pickup truck, its engine coughing to life, and trailed the sedan at a careful distance, keeping its taillights just visible through the evening haze. The sedan wound through Cedarville's quiet streets, passing the shuttered storefronts and the diner where locals lingered over coffee. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening as he navigated the familiar roads, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The sedan veered toward the edge of town, where the houses gave way to open fields and the skeletal remains of the old railway tracks. Daniel knew the area well, a forgotten corner of Cedarville where an abandoned warehouse stood, its weathered brick walls and broken windows a relic of the town's industrial past. The isolation of the place, far from prying eyes, sent a chill through him as he realized it was their destination. He pulled his truck to the side of a narrow road, partially hidden by a cluster of overgrown shrubs, and watched as Mark parked the sedan near the warehouse's rusted entrance. The scene unfolded with an eerie quietness. Mark stepped out, his dark jacket blending into the shadows, and opened the passenger door for Emily. She emerged slowly, her movements hesitant, her backpack clutched tightly to her chest. Another man, unfamiliar to Daniel, appeared from the warehouse doorway, his figure lean and clad in a worn leather jacket. The two men exchanged brief gestures, their heads close as if sharing a secret, before Mark took Emily's arm and guided her inside, the second man following. The heavy metal door clanged shut behind them, the sound echoing in the still night, and Daniel's pulse raced with a certainty that something was terribly wrong. He waited a moment, his breath shallow, before stepping out of his truck. The gravel crunched softly under his boots as he moved toward the warehouse, keeping low to avoid detection. The building loomed ahead, its brick facade cracked and stained, the windows high and clouded with grime. The surrounding area was desolate, the railway tracks glinting faintly under the moonlight, and the distant hum of a train was the only sound breaking the silence. Daniel's heart thudded as he approached a side window, its glass streaked with dirt and cobwebs. He wiped a small patch clean with his sleeve, the fabric catching on the rough surface, and peered inside, squinting to make out the dim interior. Through the murky glass, he saw Emily standing against a far wall, her slight figure illuminated by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Her face was etched with fear, her eyes wide and glistening, her body pressed against the brick as if seeking to disappear into it. Mark and the other man stood a few feet away, their postures tense, their heads bent in low conversation. The second man gestured sharply, pointing toward Emily, and Mark nodded, his expression unreadable in the shadows. The scene was suffocating, the air inside the warehouse thick with an unspoken threat. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched her backpack, her gaze darting between the men and the door. As if calculating an escape she didn't dare attempt. Daniel's stomach churned, the weight of his suspicions crashing over him. The pills, Emily's withdrawal, her fear of Mark, all the pieces he had been collecting now formed a grim picture. He couldn't hear the men's words, but their body language and Emily's terror spoke volumes. This was no innocent meeting, no casual errand. The warehouse's isolation, the late hour, and the presence of an unknown man suggested something sinister, something that threatened Emily's safety. His hand shook as he pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen's glow stark against the darkness. He dialed 911, his voice low but urgent as he described the scene to the dispatcher, emphasizing Emily's age and the suspicious circumstances. He gave the warehouse's location, his words clipped but precise, and urged haste, his fear for Emily intensifying with each passing second. As he waited, crouched beside the warehouse, Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the window, afraid to lose sight of Emily. The dispatcher assured him that officers were en route, but the minutes stretched endlessly, each one heavy with the possibility of harm. He considered intervening himself, banging on the door or shouting to disrupt whatever was happening inside, but the risk of escalating the situation held him back. He was no hero, just a bus driver with a bad knee and a heart full of worry, but he couldn't abandon Emily to whatever fate awaited her. The warehouse remained silent, its walls hiding the truth, and Daniel's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, abuse, coercion, or something even darker tied to the pills he had found. The distant wail of sirens finally broke the night, a faint but growing sound that brought a surge of relief. Daniel stayed low, his body pressed against the cold brick, his eyes never leaving the window. Emily remained against the wall, her posture rigid, her fear palpable even from a distance. Mark and the other man seemed oblivious to the approaching police, their focus locked on their conversation. Daniel's breath caught as he saw Emily's hand move to her stomach, a gesture he had seen before, now laden with new meaning. Whatever was happening in that warehouse, it was tearing her apart, and he knew his decision to follow, to call for help, was the only thing standing between her and a deeper harm. As the sirens grew louder, their sound cutting through the night, Daniel held his position, his resolve unshaken, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally unravel. As the sirens pierced the October night in 2023, their wails echoing across the desolate outskirts of Cedarville, Ohio, the police descended upon the abandoned warehouse with swift precision. The flashing lights of patrol cars illuminated the cracked brick facade, casting stark shadows as officers stormed through the rusted metal door. Inside, they found Emily Carter pressed against the wall, her slight frame trembling, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. Mark Reynolds and his associate, caught off guard, offered little resistance as the officers apprehended them, their wrists bound in handcuffs that glinted under the flickering bulb. The scene unfolded with a controlled urgency, the police moving with practiced efficiency to secure the area and ensure Emily's safety. Daniel Harper, still crouched outside by the grimy window, watched the operation unfold, his breath shallow, his heart pounding with the realization that his decision to follow had led to this moment of rescue. Emily was led out of the warehouse by a female officer, her steps unsteady, her backpack still clutched tightly to her chest. The cool night air hit her pale face, and she blinked rapidly, as if emerging from a nightmare into a world she scarcely recognized. The officers guided her to a waiting ambulance parked near the railway tracks, its red and white lights pulsing in the darkness. Paramedics wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, the fabric dwarfing her small frame, and checked her vitals with gentle care. Daniel, now standing at a respectful distance, felt a surge of relief seeing her safe, though the sight of her fragility, her trembling hands, her tear-streaked cheeks, stirred a deep ache in his chest. He remained on the sidelines, unnoticed by the flurry of activity, his role as a bus driver rendering him an unlikely hero in this unfolding drama. The police, after securing Mark and his associate in separate patrol cars, turned their attention to gathering evidence. They cordoned off the warehouse with yellow tape, its bright color a jarring contrast to the grim setting. An officer approached Daniel, taking his statement with a notepad in hand, his questions sharp but respectful. Daniel recounted the evening's events, His decision to follow Mark's sedan, the suspicious scene inside the warehouse, and his urgent call to 911. The officer nodded, jotting down details, and thanked him for his vigilance, though Daniel brushed off the praise, his focus still on Emily. As the police worked, a social worker arrived, her presence calm and reassuring, and she sat with Emily in the ambulance, offering a steady hand to hold. The ambulance soon departed for Cedarville Memorial Hospital, its siren fading into the night as it carried Emily to safety. Daniel followed in his pickup truck, the familiar creak of its suspension grounding him as he navigated the quiet roads. The hospital's emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos. Nurses and scrubs moved swiftly, phones rang, and the scent of antiseptic hung in the air. Emily was whisked away for examination, her small figure disappearing behind swinging doors. Daniel settled into a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, his jacket still heavy with the plastic bag of painkillers he had found days earlier. He felt out of place among the families and patients, yet he stayed, driven by a need to ensure Emily wasn't alone in the aftermath of her ordeal. Medical staff, after a thorough examination, confirmed the grim truth. Emily had been subjected to prolonged abuse by her stepfather, Mark, who had coerced her into hiding the painkillers to dull the physical and emotional toll of his actions. The revelation, though expected, hit Daniel like a blow, the weight of Emily's suffering settling heavily on his shoulders. He thought of her pale face, her trembling hands, and the fear that had shadowed her every movement. The pills, once a mystery, now made sense as a desperate attempt to cope with the trauma no child should endure. The hospital staff worked with quiet efficiency, arranging for a counselor to meet with Emily and coordinating with the social worker to ensure her immediate needs were met. Sarah Carter, Emily's mother, arrived at the hospital an hour later, her face ashen with shock and grief. She had been working a night shift at a nearby distribution center, unaware of the horrors unfolding in her home. The police had contacted her, their call pulling her from the monotony of her job into a nightmare she couldn't comprehend. She rushed through the hospital doors, her work uniform wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a hasty bun. When she saw Emily, now resting in a private room, she collapsed into a chair beside her daughter's bed, her hands trembling as she reached for her. The social worker explained the situation in hushed tones, detailing the abuse and the steps being taken to protect Emily. Sarah's devastation was palpable, her shoulders shaking as she processed the betrayal of the man she had trusted. Daniel, still in the waiting area, was eventually allowed to see Emily at the social worker's invitation. He approached her room cautiously, his boots heavy on the linoleum floor. Emily looked small in the hospital bed, and 4-line taped to her arm, her eyes red but dry. She offered him a faint nod, a gesture that carried a weight of gratitude she couldn't yet express. Daniel took a seat beside her, his presence quiet but steady, offering the reassurance of someone who had seen her suffering and acted to end it. He stayed until Sarah was ready to take over, her initial shock giving way to a fierce determination to support her daughter. Daniel left the room, his role in the immediate crisis fulfilled, though the weight of the night lingered in his bones. Mark Reynolds faced serious charges, the police building a case that included evidence from the warehouse and statements from his associate, who cooperated in hopes of leniency. The legal process would be long, but the immediate threat to Emily was gone. She began receiving support from counselors, their sessions a lifeline as she navigated the trauma of her experience. The hospital arranged for her to stay under observation for a few days, ensuring her physical and emotional stability before releasing her to her mother's care. Sarah, grappling with guilt and anger, made plans to relocate, determined to give Emily a fresh start away from the memories of Cedarville. Daniel returned to his bus route the following day, the familiar hum of the engine a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. The students boarded as usual, their chatter filling the air, but the fourth row remained empty, a silent reminder of Emily's absence. He drove through Cedarville's streets, past the diner, the park, and the old grain elevator, each landmark now tinged with the memory of his actions. The school community learned of his role in Emily's rescue, and colleagues offered quiet nods of respect, though Daniel deflected their praise. He was forever changed, his vigilance sharpened by the knowledge that a single moment of attention could alter a life. As he parked bus 17 at the depot, the setting sun casting long shadows across the lot, he felt a quiet pride, knowing his persistence had brought a new dawn for a girl who had suffered in silence.